I want to give my bit on open source. There have been many videos, comments, articles, blogs, you name it, trying to cover what open source is. Many of them actually get it wrong because many of them are projecting different things in what they think open source is. So I hope that I can clarify a lot of what open source is and free software is. I'm also going to be very respectful, especially to the free software movement. As they define it, there are two very distinct movements. And I hope that in explaining all of this, that you will understand that there is a difference between open source, free software, and then free of charge software. Okay? Better known as freeware. So, let me start off with a quote from Richard Stallman. Pretty much what we call the copyleft free software movement. And I will further explain what copyleft is. Now I'm going to be reading his quote. Whilst free software by any other name would give you the same freedom, it makes a big difference which name we use. Different words convey different ideas. Why free software is better than open source. The free software movement and the open source movement are today separate movements with different views and goals, although we can and do work together on some practical projects. The fundamental difference between the two movements in their values, their ways of looking at the world. For the open source movement, the issue of whether software should be open source is a practical question, not an ethical one. As one person put it, open source is a development methodology. Free software is a social movement. For the open source movement, non-free software is suboptimal solution. For the free software movement, non-free software is a social problem. And free software is the solution. But, this is a separate quote, but the explanation for free software is simple. A person who has grasped the idea of free speech, not free beer, will not get it wrong again. So, free software as in a right, a freedom, analogous freedom of speech, not in as free of charge. Because free software is not necessarily equal to free of charge. It is equal to your freedom as an end user, what the whole purpose of copyleft is. Now, I want to go over how is freedom defined, and I will further quote Richard Stallman on the 4 freedoms that he defines. Freedom 0, to run the program however you wish. Freedom 1, to study the source code of the program and change it to make the program do what you wish. Freedom 2, to distribute copies of the program to others when you wish, which includes republication of the program. Freedom 3, distribute copies of your modified version to others when you wish, which also includes publication. All 4 equals free software within a social system of the distribution of the program as in an ethical system that respects the freedom and community of the users. Any freedom missing equals proprietary software. So I hope that defines what the freedom is in free software. Now that you know the definition of the freedom that is involved within free software, now I will also take open source. Nowhere, not even in free software, does it say you cannot make money. The idea is to enforce the freedom of that software wherever it goes. So company A can have the source, modify it, sell a program. But that modified source is also available to others. And maybe a company B takes that modified source or the original source, makes their own product, a modification, sells it as well, perhaps in competition with company A, but anything that they do is also open to the community. But they are still making money. So open source or free software has nothing to do with charging for the software. You can't make them exclusive of each other. And Richard Stallman has nothing in the freedoms that would prohibit a charge for the software, so long as the freedom is maintained. So let's get into some variants, I'm going to call it, of open source, because I'm not going to use free software for these examples because many of them simply do not have all of the 4 freedoms in them. For instance, the open source used in OS X, which there is a lot of it, a huge portion of the kernel, compilers, part of core audio, as in the OpenAL source. The majority of the kernel within OS X is under a free BSD license. Or you can just say there are many forms of BSD licensing. That is not considered free software because the BSD licensing allows the source to be used for proprietary use. So in the end, if you take that source code and you use it and you modify it and you don't share that modification, you've shut down the whole purpose of it being a free software. So therein lies a variant of an open source, because the open source community does also try to fight to keep software free, but then again, as Richard Stallman explains, it's not an ethical cause. So what Apple does in turn is they have their own open source acronym, the APSL, which stands for Apple Public Source License. And within that license, they have their own clauses and things that you would have to read over the license. I will have many of these definitions within the description, and I would encourage you to click on them, by the way. Now I want to get into a really bastardized version where it's not open source, but the code is revealed. You can see the code, but you pretty much have to abide by proprietary licenses and or pay a fee, such as the Microsoft Source Initiative, right? Or I should say the Microsoft Shared Source Initiative. And just to clarify, even Microsoft will tell you in their FAQs, when a question is asked, is the Shared Source Initiative open sourcing of Microsoft code? The answer, no. The term open source software, or OSS, is broadly applied to any or a combination of 4 interrelated concepts: the OSS development model, OSS philosophies, OSS licensing regimes, and OSS business models. However, first and foremost, OSS is a development model built around the idea of community creation and sharing of source code. The other 3 concepts and the debates surrounding them lend further definition to the OSS movement or culture. Microsoft has been learning from the OSS community regarding the benefits of deeper collaboration and licensed transparency, leading to better communication with customers. We believe the most effective pathway for a commercial software company is to strike a balance between investing in research and development and the release of intellectual property assets in the form of source code for both reference and collaborative purposes. In the end, the Microsoft Shared Source Initiative is indeed a way to get a hold of Microsoft's source code for the purposes and from a proprietary standpoint and protection of intellectual property, which we have a system of. They allow it out while you obey their licenses, and in some cases pay a fee to do so. But it is for the benefit of helping Microsoft software move forward. So now let's talk about freeware, or free of charge software. Freeware does not equal free software or open source, primarily because freeware is used for, or is defined to have some sort of proprietary purpose. Freeware, while it is free of charge, the code is not available, and none of the four freedoms are even anywhere near implemented in its model. Usually freeware is a way of dangling a carrot to a consumer to try to buy something bigger or better with more features, so on and so forth. So, while many people like free of charge again does not make for free software or open source. So let's then talk about some of the arguments that have been going around, whether it's attacking or defending open source or free software. They say it's slow. And I guess the idea behind saying development of open source or free software is slow because there's no money involved, like incentive. But I just stated earlier that making money off of open source is not prohibited. It is not, has nothing to do with free of charge. The example I gave with company A and company B still stands, and thus you do have incentive. Moreover, if open source moves so slow, produces nothing, we would really have to do away with much of the underpinnings of OS X. And how about much of the framework of OpenCL and OpenAL, which is part of Core Audio, but an open source part of it when in using audio for games and like 3D stuff like that. What about LLVM or Clang? Both of these I will have a short video, by the way, in my new channel, which is mrbit10.lib for library, so that I don't have to explain long definitions of things in videos and try to make my videos shorter, and you can go over to that channel and get a very short definition of it. Then you have arguments for which open source is a way of cost sharing. If you allow more minds and more people to come in, it can take the burden off of one company for so much R&D and have the R&D spread out. Now there will be cases where people argue against that and having private development prove its results as well. There are pros and cons for both. There is another argument, is what we is dubbed wasteful parallel development. You have company A and company B that are going to make product A. It's the same product. And so all of the R&D that company A goes through and all of the R&D that company B goes through to reach product A can be considered wasteful versus had they collaborated to reach product A. Now, again, there are pros and cons for that, but these are some of the arguments that are passed along. Now, these are not the free software arguments which are coming from an ethical point of view. This is more of the open source, practical for development model argument. The other thing that can be said is that proprietary dominance, or that private development, tends to lead to a single player controlling the market, like Microsoft or Intel. And we have plenty of other examples within the tech world. Now, there are many that would argue, and I would agree, that standards help prevent some of that. But in that, in proprietary and private development, if technology is the end goal for us to reach that next technological level, when you're a corporation and you're tending to want, the idea is to make money. Therefore, the bottom line is profits before technology. In many cases, and to meet deadlines and so on and so forth, technology can get limited. it can be stalled versus having an open source or a free software environment where more minds can contribute and expand that technology. And this would go against the grain of those that would say open source or free software is slow. Well, I would bring up examples such as, well, now Apache, while as open source, doesn't follow the copyleft model, but Apache, dominant over Microsoft's Internet Information Server. You have MySQL, which they fire off releases just as consistently as Microsoft SQL has. What about Firefox versus Internet Explorer? You cannot tell me that open source or free software development models are slow and don't bring along technology. They're too widely used. They're everywhere. They're within many products that we use. And even within OS X itself, many other operating systems, Linux, BSD, you name it. So I hope I've explained open source and free software and eliminated a lot of the myths, especially about slow development or no new technologies and things like that. And that free software and open source do not mean free of charge. And in many cases, make money. And on the free software side of things, to ethically preserve the freedom for everyone using copyleft, or the open source side of things for a better program development model. Thanks for watching.